Welcome to this explainer. Okay, let's just get right into it because online studying is absolutely booming right now. And honestly, it's really easy to see why. Think back to when you first clicked enroll on a digital course. You were probably picturing yourself, I don't know, sipping coffee in some cozy cafe, effortlessly absorbing a new skill at your own pace. The incredible flexibility, right? The ability to learn from literally anywhere. It kind of feels like a cheat code for the whole education system, plus it's usually a fraction of the cost of those traditional in-person classes. But, and there's a big but here, if we look past that shiny, optimistic marketing, there's a pretty massive hidden trap that so many ambitious learners fall right into. So today, we're basically transforming into your personal survival guide for digital education. We're going to break down the most common, totally avoidable mistakes that completely sabotage online learners and give you the exact science-backed tools to make sure you actually thrive, not just barely survive this semester.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the staggering number right here, 80%. That is literally the upper end of dropout rates for some online courses. No way, right? And even if we look at the more generous lower end, it still stubbornly hovers around 40%. Now, just to put that into perspective, traditional brick-and-mortar settings only see about a 10 to 20% dropout rate. That's a massive structural difference. The fascinating part is that most students start these courses so incredibly excited, fully motivated, but then they quickly, almost silently, fall behind. And let's be super clear, it is almost never a lack of intelligence or capability. It is entirely a lack of strategy for this specific medium.
So let's unpack exactly why that happens. There is this huge, pervasive myth out there about casual online learning. The expectation is that it's going to be incredibly easy. You just kick back on the couch, maybe fold some laundry, have Netflix running quietly in the background, and boom, you just absorb calculus or coding through osmosis. But the harsh reality? Yeah, it's a serious wake-up call. Because online courses completely lack the external physical structure of a classroom, there's no professor staring you down, no peers sitting right next to you, they actually demand a dramatically higher level of self-discipline and intense active focus. The workload is very real, and without the right guardrails, it frequently leads to some deeply unexpected stress. So, to make absolutely sure you fall into that successful minority rather than the dropout majority, here is our roadmap for today. We're going to hit 1. The online dropout reality. 2. Mastering time and space. 3. Active learning over passive watching. 4. Conquering tech and isolation. And 5. Balancing load and integrity. Let's jump right in.
All right, Section 1, the online dropout reality, why students fall behind.
The very first major trap, literally right out of the gate, is just the fundamental way students view their digital education. The biggest mistake you can make is treating an online course like a casual hobby instead of a serious professional commitment. I mean, without fixed class times forcing you to be in a specific seat at a specific hour, it is dangerously easy to just tell yourself, oh, I'll just do that later tonight. But let's be honest, later rarely comes. Research consistently points to poor time management as the leading cause of online dropout. And it doesn't just tank your grades, it actually creates this vicious compounding domino effect that's linked directly to higher anxiety, poor sleep quality, and just overall lower performance across the board. Moving right along to Section 2, Mastering Time and Space.
Look, to succeed in a totally unstructured digital environment, we have to start with foundational setup fixes. We need absolute control over our time. You literally must create a structured weekly schedule exactly as if you were attending in-person classes. Step 1, block specific times in your calendar, and you have to treat these blocks as non-negotiable appointments. Don't just vaguely write study. No, write watch lecture 3.1 and outline chapter 4. Then, steps 2 and 3 use the famous Pomodoro technique. You work completely focused for 25 minutes, and then you take a 5-minute break. The psychology here is brilliant because it lowers the cognitive barrier to entry. Your brain is way less intimidated by a 25-minute sprint than a looming 3-hour study session. Studies confirm that this consistent, bite-sized daily effort completely crushes marathon last-minute cramming. And this brilliantly illustrates that to master your time, you also have to master your physical space. Trying to study in bed or sprawled on the couch? Terrible idea. Your brain strictly associates those locations with sleep and relaxation, not deep encoding. An optimized physical environment actually fights screen fatigue and instantly signals focus time to your brain. So you need a designated quiet spot used solely for learning totally free of non-study items. Set hard, unforgiving digital boundaries using website blockers like Freedom or Focus at Will, and absolutely put that phone on Do Not Disturb, or even better, physically leave it in another room. Finally, don't ignore proper ergonomics. A good chair and having your screen at eye level totally prevents the physical fatigue that can ruin a great study session.
Okay, section 3, active learning over passive watching. Now that our physical environment and calendar are locked down, we've got to talk about cognitive engagement. One of the sneakiest traps in digital education is just sitting back and passively watching a really long lecture. Let's compare the methods that completely fail against the ones that build real long-term retention. Passive consumption, things like watching videos at normal speed without writing a single word, endless highlighting, or just rereading a chapter, it feels like studying, right? But it's a total illusion. It's actually among the least effective methods out there. Instead, you've got to use active strategies. Take Cornell Notes, where you actively summarize and pull up key questions. Use Anki flashcards to leverage spaced repetition algorithms, or literally pretend to teach complex concepts out loud to an imaginary student in your room. Which brings us directly to the absolute gold standard of learning, supported heavily by cognitive researcher Jeffrey Karpik. Active recall. What is it? It means intentionally testing yourself on the material without looking at your notes or the textbook. Karpik's studies are actually super fascinating. He compared students who simply reread texts against students who closed the book and forced their brains to retrieve the info. The students who used active recall won by an absolute landslide in long-term memory tests. The takeaway here, you have to pause, process the info, and physically produce the answer from your own brain, rather than just acting like a passive sponge letting the lecture wash over you. That takes us to section 4, conquering tech and isolation. Let's shift our focus to the external threats that can rapidly derail all your hard work. Because honestly, even with perfect study techniques, technical barriers and the crushing loneliness of the digital classroom can completely take you down. So here are your actionable microsteps to defend your system. First, test your internet and have a backup hotspot ready before day 1. Second, log in and familiarize yourself with Canvas, Blackboard, or Moodle early. You really don't want to be fighting the interface when an assignment is due at 11:59 p.m. Third, always keep cloud backups. And finally, the isolation factor. It gets incredibly lonely when you don't have peers to grab a coffee with after a tough lecture. So you have to manufacture that community yourself. Proactively join or create study groups using Discord or Zoom. It creates this artificial accountability that brilliantly mirrors the social pressure of a real-life classroom.
But hey, what happens when the isolation still gets to you, burnout hits hard, and your motivation completely tanks? I mean, have you ever stared at a blinking cursor or a paused lecture, feeling totally paralyzed by the sheer volume of work left? We've all been there. That is exactly when you deploy the just 10 minutes rule. It is a wildly powerful mental trick. When you feel entirely overwhelmed, just negotiate with yourself. Tell yourself, okay, I only have to study for exactly 10 minutes, and if I still want to quit after that, I can. The secret sauce here is that momentum almost always follows action. Once you commit to and conquer just those first 10 minutes, the friction essentially disappears, and you usually end up in a flow state, finishing the entire study block.
And finally, section 5, balancing load and integrity. We really need to issue a clear warning here about course load. Data from the Brookings Institution reveals a crucial, somewhat sobering reality. On average, students experience a significant grade drop when taking online courses compared to identical in-person ones. Statistically, it's roughly a third of a standard deviation. So the crucial point is, in plain practical terms, a student who normally pulls a solid B in a physical classroom might suddenly find themselves just scraping by with a C online. And this drop impacts lower performing students even more aggressively. Look, the flexibility of digital learning is amazing, but it requires incredibly strong self-regulation. Do not overload your schedule juggling too many courses. Be realistic, and whatever you do, do not wing it with AI generation tools without thoroughly, completely understanding your specific institution's academic integrity policies. Which really brings us to the core argument that wraps this entire survival guide together. Habits matter more than the medium. Let me just say that again, because it's absolutely crucial. Habits matter more than the medium. Higher achieving students adapt better to online learning simply because they prioritize their systems over fleeting motivation. Treating your digital education as a serious professional endeavor, building strict routines, forcing active recall, actively manufacturing community engagement, that is the ultimate antidote to the online dropout epidemic. If you implement even half of these tested strategies, you are going to see a massive shift in your retention, lower your stress, and actually cross the finish line of your course. But
This leaves us with a much deeper question to think about. If the medium of online learning isn't actually the problem, if it's really just a mirror reflecting our own undisciplined habits, what other areas of our digital lives are we passively letting slip simply because there's no one in the room to supervise us? Something to think about, right? Let me know your biggest online study struggle right now in the comments. Also, don't forget to grab the free study planner template mentioned in the sources, it's linked below, to help you take total control of your time. Go crush those online learning goals, and I'll see you in the next explainer.